Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and this is going to be a little bit different from me because every so often things come up in terms of game coverage that I sort of get under my skin. Now, I'm doing games critique for a living now. It's not paying the bills. It's not paying the bills yet. I'm hoping it will. That's why I put a lot of money away. And gaming is an important part of my life in terms of me growing as a person. I went into the Tech Raptor review of the sort of Titan Souls situation, sort of gave my heart out there in terms of how it's helped me in terms of some control issues, for example. And so I want to see games that have something unique or something worthwhile and match them to the consumer. I'm very much a proponent of games may not be for everyone in terms of each game in its individualness, but there is a match at times somewhere. Now, with Will Fight for Food, it's a game that I recently covered on the channel. It was one of those games that didn't really do well with me in terms of, even though I got a developer key for it. I know that naturally can sometimes make bias. For me, it's the fact that I'm reviewing content regardless of it, that whether the key or not. To me, the key is less important than the fact that I have early access so I can get it out at that point. It's appreciated, but I can do it otherwise. It just gets more exposure if you're one of the first ones out there. But recently I've read 3 reviews, and I thank Tech Raptor Caboni for sort of bringing this to my attention. And those who were in the Tech Raptor chat last night probably saw me being like, what the is going on here? So I want to go into 3 reviews regarding the game, and reviews and gameplay in particular, that sort of got me a little bit riled up because I felt like it was not representative of what the game was and gave it a little bit more credit where credit wasn't due and was misrepresentative of the experiences and what I think is a good review in question. Alright, I want to start with the IGN India review. Now, first of all, I have a problem with it representing on the Steam store page for the Will Fight for Food game as IGN. They're different companies technically. They're different divisions. While it's under the IGN umbrella, there's different quality and different amount of employees. Okay, I can put that aside. The IGN India review, and I'm going to bring it up here right now just for the sake of this, video. It has a bunch of problems with it, and I want to go into exactly what I have problems with. And I'll put the link in the description below so that everybody can make a fair and understanding assessment of exactly what I'm talking about. When you make comparisons in games, it's a very, very delicate thing. So when I compare a game like Saints Row 4 to Grand Theft Auto 5, there are elements that are comparable and there are elements that are not. The open world nature, the plot, the combat, some will work in terms of a comparison, others won't in terms of a comparison. Be comparing Resident Evil Revelations 2 to Darkest Dungeon, for example. But there's another element beyond that, and that's sort of game dropping, in my opinion. It's when you make a game mention that has already a reputation to it, and regardless of how you word it, in terms of whether or not it's representative of the argument you're making, that it automatically puts something into the person's mind in which they make an assumption because they have already got familiarity with it. And I think in terms of this review, it does that to a horrible extent, even though it always uses it almost in a negative context. And by negative context, I mean the absence of it. So let me read out this first line here. A lot of games promise some deep experiences, be it with sheer quality of gameplay from titles like Super Meat Boy or maybe a grand story from something like Mass Effect. Will Fight for Food sets the sights a bit lower and offers only one thing, fun with some lowbrow humor at the expense of old school games. Okay, now I'm going to stop right there. The fact that you mentioned Super Meat Boy in there and the sheer quality of gameplay. Now, you use it in a negative context. You say it offers its sights a bit lower, but that's the thing. Sheer quality of gameplay in Super Meat Boy for a platformer, first of all, not a genre match. being lower than Super Meat Boy on the scale doesn't necessarily mean anything. So if, let's say this is Super Meat Boy, this is technically lower than Super Meat Boy. This is also technically lower. So to say it's lower than something like that, you automatically give it a possibility of just being like that without actually having to mention it and what it exactly has. Now, the Mass Effect comparison is a little bit more appropriate. The thing is that the game has a dialogue system, and the dialogue system, even though it's more representative of something like Alpha Protocol, it does do the job in terms of redoing my mic here. Does do the job in terms of the sort of, interactive nature of it. Do I think that's a really great comparison, especially when you said story? No, not at all. But at least I could understand that. Now, at the end of your article, you mention, sure, it won't even offer you an experience as deep as Dark Souls or Grand Theft Auto 5 can, but it doesn't really care all about that. Again, the same thing that I was mentioning before. Grand Theft Auto 5 is a very deep game from what I understand. I, myself, don't play Grand Theft Auto series. It's just not my thing. But from what I've gotten and what I've seen, it's very, very deep in terms of what it has to offer. So again, we have this, and it can be anywhere here. You already set a representation of the game that seems false, in my opinion. But let's go further than that. Let's go further than this, shall we? Let's talk about that conversation system I was talking about. Now, that's one of the main features of the game, and that's one of the main store points that they point out. How did you mention it in your article? Let's take a look. Oh, right. It allows for the freedom to move between combat mode and conversation mode. That's all you mention about that feature, which is sad because that's probably one of the most standout features of the game, despite it not working to the greatest of extents. It almost makes me think that you didn't even bother with it. Now, maybe you played it as a brawler. I mean, the fact of the matter is that's one of the game's possibilities. You could just beat the crap out of everybody. But as a reviewer, you have to look at all sides of it. And the thing is that maybe you just didn't understand and there was a conversation mode. It's not like you had any information that would have told you that, oh, I'm pointing to a part of an article that the writer and reviewer wrote as an interview with the developer, indicating that he knew perfectly well that the conversation system was in there. For you not to mention anything about it is sheer madness in my mind, and really shows me that you did not do a great job in this review at all. At all. I mean, not even close. You mentioned it's a brawler. The way that you word the review, you make it sound like it's a brawler, and that's going to come up later on in another part of this video, because to say it's a brawler probably brings up the worst part of the game, in my opinion. But not only that, it makes it sound like it's like something like Streets of Rage or like something like Double Dragon. It's nowhere near that. It's like completely on the other side of things. In fact, a lot of the comments made in other parts of other reviews is the fact that it felt like the combat was added as sort of a secondary option and almost bad in terms of making you move towards the conversation piece. So for you to call it a brawler and maybe bring that out more, again, I question whether or not you play the game that much. But a good time waster. I love that one. It's a good time waster. Well, I've used that phrase in terms of it's a good game to sort of sit back and watch a YouTube video with. That to me is not a time waster. Anything is a time waster. I mean, me doing this technically is a time waster. Now, is it a good time waster? I guess that's subjective. But to use that as a plus point in your review, really? And then finally, your review's length. Not the length of the game, mind you, which is short, but 6 paragraphs for a review. 7.5. It feels like you didn't necessarily take your effort with the game, and I hate to call people out on that. And there's inconsistencies, unfortunately, here, and when you see things like this, you get the paranoid tinfoil hat on. You see that the developer has comments on their Facebook page, one or two. You see that they're friends on Google Plus. It becomes this situation where you're like, ugh. And especially because unfortunately Pterodactyl is an Indian company, and this is IGN India. Now, granted, it makes sense for IGN India to cover Indian games. I mean, it's a local portion. There is sort of I don't want to say nationalism to it, but there is sort of a pride there. There's a pride somewhat with like the whole ripoff of Hotline Miami from Russia. You see a lot of good Russian comments on it. It just feels like this review completely missed the mark. And in particular, I want to go into the other sections of reviews and show you exactly where I'm having major problems with. Alright, so I talked about IGN India, and I want to now, before we're focused on Polygon's. Polygon didn't do a formal review. They did a gameplay footage, a YouTube video with two of their writers in question. I think one is Danielle. I don't know the other guy's name. I don't really pay attention to Polygon that much. Usually it's in a negative context. They do some gameplay footage, and there's some things I took exception to in the way that it was presented. First of all, the social commentary portion. And I'm going to get more into that in the third part of this video in terms of the third review, but the game to me was sort of that random slapstick comedy where you have, like, in the same conversation, it mentions a Reagan dominatrix, a Cuban cigar, and bribes that come all out of nowhere. They all come from this random place. And it's hard to get social commentary on that. Honestly, the homeless portion part of it, that sort of like the commentary on homelessness, it barely mentions that. If you didn't have the title to work off of, yeah, it mentions it once or twice, but it never really says he's like starving at any point. And so I do wonder, are you looking into this more than it should be? Now, I do recognize Polygon has a tendency to do that. They're a lot more liberal in terms of, looking for those kind of things. So, okay, there's technically some history there. Okay, fine. I have a major problem, though, with the video portion when you say one thing. And Danielle, I think, is her name. And in this in particular, you say at one point, I'm about an hour into the game. Now, the gameplay footage that you have in the background when you say that point is very critical, because when you make a point like that, people will make the assumption that when you say I'm about an hour into the game, that's the hour check mark, that is where you've played an hour up to that point. The thing is that the footage that you said that along with is literally 5 minutes into the game. And that's being generous. You could actually only be a minute into it if you skip all the conversations at the beginning. There are 7 NPCs you can all talk to. Then you go to the ring. It's all conversations. There's no combat whatsoever. And then you're thrown into the section that she's in. I have a problem with that because it gives a big boost to the idea of the length of this game, the content in this game. And content is one of its weakest parts. The fact of the matter is you can beat this game in under an hour if you really try. Now, whether or not you hit every NPC in that case, okay, maybe you skip an NPC or two. I don't think I did. So I have a major problem with that. I also have a major problem with the fact that you call this a 99% RPG. You also then contradict yourself, saying it's more of an adventure game later on. Now, there aren't that many RPG elements in this game. Now, RPG is really a nebulous term because it can mean a lot of things. When I think of RPG, I think of Final Fantasy, for example. I think of some turn-based combat or stat boosts and things like that, but that's not necessarily what a role-playing game is in its most pure definition. But the adventure game is a lot more conductive to this. The fact of the matter is that the adventure portion is the conversation system and things like that. To say it's 99% RPG is stretching it. And I want to note this because you also then say it's 1% Brawler, which maybe that's going a little bit too far, but I do actually agree with you on that. The fact is that there's a majority of it pushing you towards the conversation system rather than the Brawler system. But that's funny when compared to the IGN review, which basically called it a Brawler. You see where I'm going with this, with the inconsistencies? It's like they played two different games. Now, granted, you can play games completely differently nowadays, and that's perfectly fine. That's actually a strength of video games, that you can play in different ways. But as a reviewer, you also have to, if you're presenting this as a review, for example, you have to present it as, this is the way to play. And I do give Polygon credit for including both parts of it and showing you off both parts of it and being critical of the combat, for example. I do want to say that the reviewer is saying it's stiff on a keyboard. That's a little bit weird to me because I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. The game is stiff. Yes, it's stiff. Now, whether or not you prefer the controller portion and it doesn't have controller support, okay, fine. You made it implied that the keyboard was stiff, that just the keyboard and PC is stiff itself. All right, let's go to the third one here. Now, the least problems I have is with the Entertainment Buddha review. I do still have little problems with it, but it's the one that I say, of all the three that played that and reviewed or took a look at the gameplay, it was the one that I think played through it the most and understood what was going on the most. And so I give Entertainment Buddha credit for that. I still have problems with it, but I do want to specifically say one part of this, because again, I want to go back to the idea of these all being the same game that they're talking about. Let me help you with that. Like artichokes and Nutella or cinnamon donuts and onion dip, Will Fight for Food is also an aardvark. Are you wondering what that means? Do you even know what an aardvark is? On a scale of 5 to 1, how confused are you? 7? Good answer. You're ready to play Will Fight for Food. That actually, I do like that description of it, because that's what it felt like for me. Now, again, perception and everything, it can be different like that. But remember what I said earlier on with Polygon about the social commentary. Does that sound like a social commentary game when you give that description? No, it doesn't. And I think this one's closer to it. And again, it's the three different reviews being so completely different and completely different from each other without the same elements. Even with games like, let's say, Dragon Age Inquisition, for example. While people will have different experiences, there are core elements that you expect them to have the same experience with. Here, it felt like if you would have told me these were just given like the key points out of each review and told me those are the key points of this game and not told me these are all the same game, I would have expected 3 different reviews, honestly. And that's part of my big problem with this. Now, I do have problems with this review regarding the 90 on the story. Not sure how that got there. I especially with the whole slapstick and like out of randomness, it may have worked for you and I understand that. That's why I have less problems with it. Now, I do want to give the reviewer one word of advice, though. In a section, you say, you can go on an amazingly heroic adventure, redeem yourself, and come to the aid of all your wrestling partners you once wronged in a series of events that will contain no sarcasm. Or you can complete the prophecy and bring this weird homeless guy in the alley a dirty pizza joint you pulled out of a dumpster. Now, both of those events happen. But the way that you use the word or there, it implies a path system. It implies that you have a choice between X and Y. It's more so the fact that you have a choice to do Y or not. The fact is that prophecy portion is sort of a side quest at that point. You still can do both at the same time. And for you to say or, or can mean both. It's more, the way that you imply or there is more of an XOR. If I know for those who don't understand what an XOR is in, computer programming, well, I'm sorry. Look, basically it's more of a binary OR where it can be one or the other. It can't be both. And the way that he implies it is that it's either one or the other. You can do this or this, not, oh, you can do this or this. You can do both or neither. So I do think the wording there was incorrect. And I do still, again, genre 2D action RPG. Okay. But again, I have less problems with it. But I want to take this time to see. These are the 3 note cards I made on each of these reviews. I almost wanted to make them different colors because they all represent 3 different games. Except, in the end, they're all technically one game. I know this is probably not the greatest of images in question, but it's almost comical in the way that the games were presented. And again, I do understand that people can have different experiences, but as a reviewer in particular, and person who's presenting it as a consumer choice, you have to present it objectively as possible. Take a step back and say, what are its strengths? That I may have played it this way, but I need to see the other elements of it. And for those who will watch my channel on a regular basis and watch this video, take a look tomorrow on Tech Raptor regarding a video on objectivity. It is a long video. It's very long for me in terms of its 28-minute video. I'm really actually sort of excited about it to see what the reaction to it is, but yeah. So that is my sort of beef for today. And I know I don't do this often. I don't like calling people out like that, especially when it comes to a game that can have an opinion. But when I think it's misrepresentative of what the game has to offer in any way, then I have to speak up. I have to say, hey, look, this is not right. And this comes back to the love of video games. Just simple as that. All right, I'll see you guys later.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you have a chance, leave some feedback and comments below. If you liked the video, hit that like button. And if you want more content like this, hit that subscribe button. This is Dragnix signing off, hoping that gaming brings as much fun to you as it does for me.